Good morning, everybody. We're getting ready for our 2018 strategic planning process, and I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the history of strategic planning at Newton Fire EMS, why it's important, and what we want to do with the information. So we really started to engage in strategic planning around 2012, and the process has changed just a little bit every year since then. Strategic planning for us is a pretty important activity because it helps us to develop a continuous plan of work from year to year, and it also helps us connect each year's work to a larger framework. Without that larger framework, we might end up just doing some random stuff each year that may or may not help us get us where we want to go. So a strategic plan then helps us to identify where we want to go as an organization, and the plan of work that it creates becomes the vehicle that helps us get there. In 2016, for example, our process helped us create a list of goals and objectives for the coming years that included things like improving the way we leverage technology, upgrading our reporting platform, establishing a budget support team to help us pursue grants and partnerships to fund some of these projects, conducting an equipment and a facilities needs assessment, and of course reestablishing our fire marshal position. And a lot of you have been engaged in projects related to these goals, and I think we've made quite a bit of progress towards meeting them. Some of these goals will get finished up before the end of the year, and some of them will probably go on forever. In past years, we've identified long-term goals that have to do with updating and rewriting our SOGs, performing a training needs assessment, developing a revolving training plan that stems from that needs assessment, and improving our professional development strategies. So these goals probably will go on forever. They're not going to go away. They're going to carry over from year to year, and that, I think, is what makes them part of a strategic plan and not just a tactical short-term project that we conclude each year and start over from scratch the next year. Because this sort of thing is so important to the life of our department, it's important that we engage as many of our members as possible to provide input to the plan. That's why we send our SWOT survey to everybody on the department. Regardless of your rank, regardless of your position, we want you to help us decide what's most important. It's also why each member is invited to attend our strategic planning sessions. We really want this to be our plan, not just my plan. Part of an organization's strategic plan is the mission statement. Our mission statement was developed by a group of ambulance department and fire department members back in 1996 in advance of our merger. One of the things we try to do every year is evaluate our mission statement to make sure that it still fits what we do, and so far I think it's held up pretty well. Most of you probably know that mission statements tell people what an organization does and why it exists. Ours says we're dedicated to a constant pursuit of excellence in the provision of quality fire, rescue, medical, and other individualized services to those in need. In some ways it's kind of specific, in other ways it's kind of vague, but it seems to fit what we do and why we exist even today. Another part of an organization's strategic plan is the vision statement. Until now, we've never really taken the time to formally develop a vision statement for our department, but I tend to think that we all kind of have just intuitively get what our vision is. Vision statements tell people where we hope our organization will be someday. It defines our aspired state. The Chiefs and I recently reviewed all of the input that you've given us from past strategic planning sessions over the years, and we've tried to distill what you've said about the future of our organization into a short but hopefully accurate phrase that gets right to the point. I'm not saying this is the finished product, but I hope it will serve as a place for us to start the conversation. Here's what we came up with after working at it and arguing about it for quite a while. The vision of the Newton Fire EMS department is to build a premier fire EMS agency. Now we may want to add or subtract from it or scrap it and start over, but I think it pretty clearly says what we've collectively been doing and saying for a long time. So I'd like for you to give this some thought and come to our strategic planning session prepared to discuss and refine this. So I really want to crystallize this before we're done with our process this year. Once we clarify our vision, that's where we want to be, and we can create goals to support it. Goals are broad and kind of vague, and really they only do three things. They increase things, they decrease things, or they maintain things. For an example, an appropriate goal might be to increase our ability to provide our own water supply for rural firefighting operations. Objectives then are the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound activities that help us meet our goals. Using this example, an appropriate objective might be to secure funding to purchase a water tender equipped to carry at least 1,000 gallons of water by October 15, 2017. From our objectives come action items like finding a grant, writing the grant, purchasing equipment, and all of the other things we have to do before we have a functional water tender to send into the field. Some of our goals are short-term, like remodeling a fire station. Some of our goals are long-term, like building a new station. But all our goals should stem from our mission and our vision and the ways we collectively decide to do business. An in-depth understanding of our vision and goals helps us deliver the best service we possibly can, and it also helps us create budgets to support our work. If we're engaged in doing random stuff from year to year, it's pretty difficult to justify the money we need to operate, especially if we're asking for more of it. If we're able to articulate a well-considered plan of work that produces meaningful outcomes, I think we're going to stand a better chance of acquiring and maintaining the funds we need to do business. It's important to think about creating a vision that remains relevant for a long time. If we hope to remain relevant over time, though, our plan will require frequent adjustments and calibration of our goals and objectives in response to a changing environment and fluid community needs. The things that our community depends on us for today are a lot different than the things they depended on us 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. That's why it's important that we revisit our strategic plan at least once a year, and it's why we try hard to hold ourselves accountable for making progress throughout the year. It's important, too, that we ask ourselves some tough questions along the way and that we answer them honestly. Questions like, how will we know how we're doing? How do we define and measure progress? If we can't objectively measure our progress, then how can we construct annual budgets to support the plan? We've discussed the concept of inputs, outputs, and outcomes in the past. And when we talk about projects and programs and service delivery, those inputs are the things that we'll invest. So inputs answer the question, what will it take? Outputs then are the things that we'll produce. And outcomes are why it all matters. So a handy example, I think, is a fire suppression training program. In this example, inputs might be things like money to send people to classes, time spent in training sessions, and new equipment that we might need to purchase to help us do a better job. Outputs might include quicker knockdown times, less water use for fire suppression activities, and shorter on-scene times for our companies. Outcomes then, why does it matter, would include things like decreased property damage, fewer fire-related injuries and fatalities, and reduced frequency of mutual aid companies running our calls. So in addition to all of the other things we've talked about, another important piece of our strategic plan is the willingness and the ability to measure what we do. It's difficult to get better at something if we don't really know how well we do it in the first place. We can't go around telling people we're the best in the business if we don't have any way to prove it. Performance benchmarking is a process that allows us to select the things we want to measure and then compare our performance to industry standards and to how other departments who are similarly situated and similarly staffed do them. Once we see how we're doing, we can calibrate our activities to increase our performance in specific areas. If we look at the previous example, we might start with the desired outcomes of reduce property damage, increase survivability in residential structure fires. One way to produce these outcomes might be to keep fires contained to the room of origin. So if the fire never has a chance to extend to the rest of the house, we might be able to prove that the damage will be reduced and survivability will be increased. There are several variables to consider in trying to hold the fire to the room of origin. Speedy response times, efficient fire attack, and proper ventilation all play a role. But let's select one that we know other fire departments track with some degree of reliability. This would be line on fire times. This is the elapsed time between when the first engine company arrives on scene until the crew gets water directly on the fire. If we track this performance metric and compare it to other similar fire departments, we ought to be able to determine how we stack up. But what if some of those other fire departments show up with a 5-person engine company compared to our 2 or 3-person engine company? What if we train as hard as we possibly can, but we just can't get our times down to an acceptable level? If we can demonstrate that a lack of personnel inhibits our ability to perform efficient fire attack, and that this inefficiency produces poor property loss and survivability outcomes, we might stand a chance at constructing a budget that supports increasing or adjusting our personnel allocation. We can apply this model to any number of initiatives: reducing cooking-related home fires, improving neurological outcome after cardiac arrest, reducing lost time work-related injuries. You name it, if we can measure it, we can manage it. So how does all this tie back into strategic planning? If we look critically at our operation and measure our performance, we can translate these results into meaningful goals and objectives to help us improve our performance and produce meaningful outcomes. In other words, we may not know what we're bad at if we don't look for it, and if we don't know what needs improvement, we might spend our limited resources on the wrong things. Strategic planning, then, is a cyclical process that exists at the 30,000 foot level, as well as down in the weeds where the work actually happens, and everywhere in between. So we'll stop here, and I'll just say I look forward to your participation in this year's strategic planning process. I hope you come with some great ideas to help us build a premier fire EMS organization. I'm pretty excited about the work that lays ahead of us. I'll see you there.